At some point, it stops being about bad timing and starts becoming something much harder to admit. You begin to see a pattern you can't ignore anymore. The delays, the hesitation, the almost starts, they're not accidents. They're decisions you've been repeating quietly. You've said it before, maybe even today. I'll start tomorrow. And in the moment, it feels reasonable. It feels like you're being patient, strategic, even responsible. But there's a part of you that knows the truth. Tomorrow has become a place where your goals go to disappear. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly. One delay here, one excuse there, and each time you soften it with logic. You give it a good reason. You make it sound justified. Until one day, you realize it's not occasional anymore. It's a pattern that keeps you exactly where you are. And what makes it dangerous is how comfortable it feels. You're not failing loudly. You're not collapsing. You're just staying the same. And because nothing dramatic is happening, it's easy to ignore. Easy to tell yourself that things will change eventually, but eventually never arrives on its own. It's built by decisions that don't feel comfortable in the moment. And right now, if you're honest, you can feel the gap between what you say you want and what you're actually doing to get there. There's a voice inside you that's been getting louder. Not emotional, not dramatic, just clear. It's been pointing things out you used to ignore, reminding you of what you said you would do, showing you where you're holding back. And it's not going away anymore, because deep down, you don't lack knowledge. You don't lack ability. You know what needs to be done. That's not the problem. The problem is the space between knowing and doing. And that space is where your excuses have been living comfortably. You've learned how to protect them. You call it waiting for the right time. You call it needing more clarity. You call it preparing. But if you strip all of that away, what's left is simple. You've been choosing what feels easier in the moment over what moves you forward. And the longer that continues, the heavier it becomes. Not because of the work itself, but because of the weight of knowing you're not acting. That quiet pressure builds until it turns into frustration, not at the world, but at yourself. There comes a moment when that frustration shifts. It stops being temporary. It becomes final. You don't just feel annoyed, you feel done. Done repeating the same cycle. Done negotiating with yourself. Done watching time pass while nothing actually changes. That moment is different. It's not loud or emotional. It's sharp, clear. It cuts through all the stories you've been telling yourself. And for the first time, you see things exactly as they are. No filters, no justifications, no softened explanations. You realize that no one is coming to push you. No perfect opportunity is going to remove resistance. No sudden burst of motivation is going to carry you forward. If anything changes, it will be because you made it change, nothing else. And that realization can feel heavy, but it's also powerful because it puts everything back in your hands. It removes the illusion that something external is holding you back. It shows you that the only thing standing between you and progress is your next decision. Right now, you're at a point where you can either continue the pattern or break it. Not in some dramatic, life-changing way, but in a small, immediate choice. A choice to act when you don't feel like it. A choice to move without overthinking it. because that's where the shift begins. Not in motivation, not in waiting for the perfect mindset, but in action that happens regardless of how you feel. That's the part most people avoid, and the part that separates those who change from those who stay the same. You don't need to fix everything today. You don't need a complete plan. You don't need certainty. What you need is a single moment of honesty followed by a single moment of action. That's enough to break the cycle if you're willing to do it. And once that cycle breaks, even slightly, something changes. You start to see yourself differently. Not as someone who plans, waits, and delays, but as someone who acts. And that shift, as small as it seems, has the power to change everything that follows. So if you're tired of your own excuses, not just frustrated, but truly tired, then this is the moment that matters. Not later, not tomorrow, now. Because the next move you make is either going to reinforce the pattern or finally break it. There comes a moment in the life of every individual when the truth, long softened by explanation and hidden beneath layers of reasoning, begins to stand plainly before him. It is not a loud moment, nor is it dramatic. It arrives quietly, yet with a clarity that cannot be dismissed. In this moment, a man ceases to look outward for causes and begins, perhaps for the first time, to look inward with sincerity. He begins to see a pattern, not an isolated incident, nor a temporary delay, but a repeated sequence of decisions that have quietly shaped his present condition. The plans that were never carried through, the actions that were postponed, the intentions that were spoken with conviction, yet never fulfilled with execution. At first, this realization is uncomfortable, for it removes the comfort of uncertainty. It strips away the belief that circumstances alone have determined his position. It reveals that what once appeared as chance or misfortune has, in many instances, been the result of repeated choice. This is the beginning of honest recognition. Most men do not reach this point easily. They move through life supported by explanations that soften the weight of inaction. They tell themselves that the time was not right, that more preparation was needed, that conditions were unfavorable. And these explanations, though often reasonable in appearance, serve a single purpose. They protect the individual from confronting the truth. That truth is simple. What is delayed repeatedly is not delayed, it is avoided. Yet the mind does not accept this conclusion without resistance. It seeks to preserve its comfort. It offers new reasons, new justifications, new assurances that action will come later. It tells the individual that tomorrow will provide a better moment, that clarity will soon arrive, that readiness is just beyond reach, and so the pattern continues, not through force, but through quiet agreement. Each time the individual accepts this agreement, he reinforces it. Each delay becomes easier. Each excuse becomes more convincing. And over time, what began as occasional hesitation becomes a fixed habit. This habit does not announce itself as failure. It presents itself as patience. It disguises itself as careful thinking. It appears as responsibility, as caution, as preparation. Yet beneath all of these forms lies the same condition, the absence of action. It is important to understand that the danger of this condition lies not in what it prevents, but in how it feels. for it does not create immediate consequence. It does not produce visible collapse. The individual continues to function, to move, to engage with life. And because nothing dramatic occurs, the pattern is allowed to persist. This persistence is what makes it powerful. The individual may go days, weeks, even years without fully recognizing that he is standing in the same place. He may believe that he is progressing, for he is thinking, planning, considering, yet without action, thought remains unexpressed and intention remains unrealized. It is only when the accumulation of these unfulfilled intentions becomes too great that something begins to shift. The individual feels a form of pressure not from the world, but from within. It is the weight of knowing what could have been done, the awareness of what has been postponed, the quiet recognition that time has passed without corresponding movement. This pressure does not arise from external judgment. It arises from internal awareness, for within every man there exists a standard, whether acknowledged or not, by which he measures himself. And when his actions fall repeatedly below this standard, a tension is created. This tension cannot be removed through explanation. It may be softened, it may be delayed, but it remains until one day it reaches a point where it can no longer be ignored. This is the moment of honest recognition. It is not emotional in its nature. It is not driven by frustration alone. It is clear, direct, unavoidable. The individual sees without distortion that he has been participating in his own delay, that the distance between where he stands and where he desires to be is not the result of lack of knowledge nor lack of ability, but lack of consistent action. This realization, though difficult, is powerful, for it returns control. As long as a man believes that his condition is determined by external forces, he remains dependent upon those forces for change. He waits, he hopes, he reacts. But when he sees that his own decisions have contributed to his position, he gains something that cannot be given by circumstance. He gains authority, authority over his direction, authority over his actions, authority over what comes next. It is here that many hesitate, for with authority comes responsibility. No longer may the individual place the cause of his condition upon time, upon circumstance, or upon others. He must accept that what follows will be shaped by what he chooses. This acceptance requires courage, for it removes all refuge, yet it also provides all possibility. The man who reaches this point stands threshold. Behind him lies the pattern he now understands. Before him lies the opportunity to change it. The change itself does not require immediate transformation. It does not demand that everything be corrected at once. It requires only one thing, a decision. Not a decision formed in thought alone, but a decision expressed through action. It is in this moment that the individual must resist the urge to return to explanation. He must not tell himself that he will begin later, that he will prepare further, that he will wait for a better time. For he now understands where such thinking leads. Instead, he must act. However small the action may appear, it must be taken. For action is the only force that breaks the pattern. Thought may recognize it, emotion may react to it, but only action alters it. This first act carries significance beyond its size. It marks shift, a shift from delay to movement, from explanation to execution, from intention to reality. And with this shift, something begins to change within the individual. He no longer sees himself solely as one who plans. He begins to see himself as one who acts. This change in self-perception is subtle, yet profound. For identity is shaped not by what a man intends, but by what he repeatedly does. As this awareness grows, the individual begins to experience a new form of clarity. He sees that the pattern which once held him was not fixed, it was sustained, and what is sustained may be altered. This understanding removes the sense of permanence that once accompanied his condition. It replaces it with possibility, not distant possibility, but immediate. For he now knows that change does not require perfect conditions. It requires a different decision, and that decision is always available. Thus, the moment of honest recognition becomes the foundation of all that follows. It is not the end of the struggle, but the beginning of direction. It is the point at which the individual ceases to move unconsciously and begins to act with awareness. It is the moment in which he stops negotiating with himself and begins to lead himself. And so, let him stand in this clarity. Let him not turn away from what he has seen. Let him not soften it with new explanations. Let him accept it fully, for within it lies his power. And let him affirm with quiet certainty, I see my actions clearly, without excuse or distortion. I recognize the pattern I have maintained, and through this recognition, I choose to change it. When a man has reached the point of honest recognition, he is then confronted with a force that has long operated within him, often without his awareness. This force is not external, nor is it imposed upon him by circumstance. It is constructed quietly through thought and reinforced through repetition. It is the habit of excuse. An excuse is seldom presented as falsehood. It does not appear as something to be rejected outright. It comes instead in a form that is reasonable, acceptable, and often difficult to challenge. It speaks with the voice of logic. It offers justification. It provides explanation. And in doing so, it shields the individual from the discomfort of action. At its origin, an excuse is not a deliberate act of deception. It is a response to resistance, a response to uncertainty, a response to the natural discomfort that arises when a man is faced with the necessity of doing what he would rather postpone. Instead of confronting this discomfort directly, the mind seeks relief. It searches for a way to delay action without admitting that it is doing so. And in this search, it produces a reason that allows the individual to remain at ease while avoiding the very step that would move him forward. This is the subtle beginning. The individual tells himself that he requires more time, more clarity, more preparation. He convinces himself that waiting is the wiser course, that delay is not avoidance, but strategy. And because this reasoning appears sound, it is accepted without resistance. Yet beneath this acceptance lies a pattern. For once the mind has discovered that it may avoid action through explanation, it returns to this method repeatedly. Each new moment of decision becomes an opportunity to apply the same reasoning. Each hesitation is supported by a new justification. and with each repetition, the habit strengthens. The danger of excuses does not lie in their occasional use. It lies in their accumulation. One excuse, taken alone, appears harmless. It delays action briefly, and the individual may still believe that he will act at a later time. But when excuses are repeated, they begin to form a structure that supports inaction and resists change. This structure becomes familiar, and what is familiar becomes comfortable. The individual no longer questions the delay. He accepts it as part of his routine. He becomes accustomed to the cycle of intention followed by explanation, of decision followed by postponement. And because this cycle does not produce immediate consequence, it continues without interruption. It is here that excuses gain their hidden power. They do not prevent action through force. They prevent it through permission. Each excuse grants the individual permission to remain where he is. It assures him that no harm has been done, that the delay is justified, that action may still occur at a more suitable time. And in granting this permission, it removes the urgency that would otherwise compel him to act. Over time, this permission becomes a habit of thought. The individual begins to anticipate the excuse before the action. He expects resistance, and he prepares a justification in advance. He no longer experiences delay as a deviation. He experiences it as a normal response. This normalization is the most dangerous stage, for when a man accepts his own excuses without question, he loses the ability to distinguish between what is necessary and what is comfortable. He begins to believe that his explanations are truth, rather than recognizing them as choices. Fear often plays a quiet role in this process, not the fear that is openly acknowledged, but the fear that operates beneath the surface, the fear of failure, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of stepping into a condition where the outcome is not guaranteed. These fears do not always present themselves directly. Instead, they disguise themselves within the excuse. The individual does not say, "I am afraid to act." He says, "I need more time." He does not say, "I am uncertain." He says, "I am preparing." And so the true cause remains concealed, while the excuse takes its place. This concealment allows the pattern to continue without interruption. For what is not recognized cannot be corrected. It is only when the individual begins to examine his explanations that the structure of excuse becomes visible. He sees that the reasons he has accepted are not always necessary, that the conditions he has been waiting for are not required, that the delay he has justified is in many cases a choice. This recognition is not immediate. It develops through observation. The individual must begin to listen to his own reasoning. He must question the explanations he provides. He must ask whether they lead to action or whether they lead to continued delay. In asking this question, he begins to separate truth from convenience. He sees that many of his explanations, though reasonable in appearance, do not serve his advancement. They protect his comfort, but they limit his progress. They reduce immediate discomfort, but they extend long-term dissatisfaction. This understanding changes his perspective. He no longer sees excuses as harmless. He sees them as influential. He recognizes that each excuse, if accepted, contributes to the maintenance of his current condition. And if his current condition is not aligned with his desire, then each excuse becomes a reinforcement of that misalignment. At this stage, the individual is faced with a decision. He may continue to accept his explanations, preserving his comfort while delaying his progress, or he may begin to reject them, accepting discomfort in exchange for movement. This choice is not made once, it is made repeatedly. For each moment of decision presents the same opportunity, the opportunity to act or the opportunity to explain. The man who would change his condition must learn to recognize this moment clearly. He must see the excuse as it forms. He must hear the reasoning as it presents itself. And he must choose deliberately whether he will accept it or dismiss it. This dismissal is not easy, for the excuse is persuasive. It offers relief. It promises comfort. It appeals to reason. Yet the individual who understands its effect sees beyond its immediate appeal. He recognizes that what it offers in the present, it takes from the future, that what it preserves now, it limits later. And with this understanding, he begins to act differently. He does not argue with the excuse. He does not attempt to eliminate it entirely. He simply refuses to follow it. He allows it to appear, but he does not accept its direction. He proceeds with action, even in its presence. He moves forward, not because the excuse has disappeared, but because he has chosen not to obey it. This is the beginning of control, not the control of eliminating thought, but the control of choosing action despite it. As this choice is repeated, the power of excuses begins to diminish. They lose their authority. They no longer determine behavior. They become what they truly are, suggestions rather than commands. And as this shift occurs, the individual begins to experience a new condition. Where once he was guided by explanation, he is now guided by decision. Where once he delayed, he now acts. Where once he justified, he now executes. Others will begin to observe this change. They will notice that he no longer speaks in terms of intention alone, but in terms of action. That he no longer offers reasons for delay, but produces results. That his words and his behavior have come into alignment. This alignment increases trust, for trust is not built upon what a man says, but upon what he does consistently. And the man who acts, even in the presence of difficulty, demonstrates a reliability that others recognize and value. Thus, the individual who once lived within the structure of excuse begins to step beyond it, not through sudden transformation, but through repeated refusal. Each refusal weakens the pattern. Each action strengthens the alternative. And over time, what was once a habit of delay becomes a habit of execution. This is the power of choice, applied consistently. It reshapes behavior. It alters direction. It produces results. And so, let the individual become aware of the explanations he accepts. Let him examine them without judgment, but with clarity. Let him see that they do not remove difficulty, but extend it. And let him choose with firm intention to act regardless of them. For in this choice lies the beginning of his freedom. And let him affirm with steady resolve, I release the explanations that hold me in place. I no longer accept delay disguised as reason. I choose action, and through action, I move forward. There exists a condition, more common than failure itself, that prevents men from advancing despite possessing knowledge, ability, and even desire. It is not ignorance that confines them, nor lack of opportunity. It is the quiet division between what they know and what they do. This division is rarely acknowledged, for the individual who experiences it often believes that knowledge alone is progress. He reads, he listens, he studies, and in doing so, he gains understanding. He becomes aware of what must be done, how it must be done, and why it must be done. And yet, despite this awareness, he remains unchanged in action. This creates an illusion of advancement. The mind, having acquired information, feels as though it has moved forward. It experiences a sense of satisfaction, a temporary feeling of growth, but this growth is incomplete, for knowledge without application does not alter condition. It informs, but it does not transform. Thus, a man may know exactly what is required of him and still fail to do it. This is the division. It is not wide in appearance, but it is vast in effect. On one side lies intention, on the other lies execution, and between them stands the decision that is too often postponed. The individual convinces himself that he is preparing, that he is gathering what he needs before he begins, that he is waiting for the proper moment. And in this reasoning, he delays action while maintaining the belief that he is moving toward it. Yet preparation, when extended beyond necessity, becomes another form of delay. There is a point at which additional knowledge no longer contributes to readiness, but serves only to postpone execution. The man who fails to recognize this point becomes a collector of information rather than a practitioner of it. He knows much, but he applies little. This condition produces a particular form of frustration, for the individual cannot claim ignorance, nor can he deny awareness. He knows what must be done, and this knowledge remains present. It does not disappear. It returns to him again and again, reminding him of what he has not acted upon. This reminder creates tension, a tension between intention and behavior, a tension between desire and action. And over time, this tension grows. It becomes a quiet pressure that follows the individual through his daily life. It appears in moments of reflection, in times of stillness, in the awareness that he is capable of more than he is currently expressing. This pressure is not caused by external expectation. It is generated from within, for there exists within every man a recognition of his own potential. And when that potential is not acted upon, it does not remain silent. It presents itself as dissatisfaction, as restlessness, as a sense that something remains unfinished. Many attempt to relieve this pressure through further thought. They plan more, they analyze more, they consider more, believing that with enough clarity, action will follow. But clarity does not always precede action. More often, it follows it. The man who waits to feel completely certain before he acts may wait indefinitely. For certainty is rarely present in advance. It develops through experience, through movement, through engagement with the very thing that is being avoided. This is the principle that must be understood. Action produces clarity, not the reverse. The individual who acts even without complete certainty gains information that cannot be obtained through thought alone. He sees what works and what does not. He adjusts. He improves. And with each step, his understanding deepens. The individual who waits remains unchanged. His knowledge increases, but his condition does not. It is also important to recognize that the first action does not need to be significant. It need not be perfect. It need not produce immediate result. It must only be taken, for it is not the size of the action that matters. It is the breaking of the division. When a man moves from knowing to doing, even in the smallest measure, he alters his position. He steps out of the realm of intention and into the realm of execution. And in this step, he begins to close the distance that has held him in place. This closing is not completed in a single act. It is a process. Each action reduces the gap. Each execution strengthens the connection between thought and behavior. And over time, what was once a division becomes a pathway. Others will begin to notice this change. They will observe that the individual no longer speaks only of what he intends, but demonstrates what he does, that his words are followed by action, that his plans are accompanied by execution. This alignment creates trust, for men do not place confidence in intention, they place it in action. The individual who consistently acts upon what he knows becomes reliable in the eyes of others. His presence carries weight. His commitments are believed. His direction is respected. This respect is not requested. It is earned through consistency. It must also be understood that the division between knowing and doing is not eliminated once and for all. It presents itself repeatedly. Each new level of growth introduces new decisions, new actions, and new opportunities for delay. The individual must therefore remain aware. He must recognize the moment when thought begins to replace action, and he must respond accordingly. This awareness becomes a form of discipline. He no longer allows himself to remain in knowledge without application. He does not permit extended delay under the appearance of preparation. He acts even when the action is imperfect, for he understands that imperfection in motion is more valuable than perfection in thought. This discipline produces a change in identity. The individual no longer sees himself as one who intends. He sees himself as one who executes. This shift is powerful, for identity governs behavior. And when a man identifies as one who acts, he naturally moves toward action. He no longer debates excessively. He no longer postpones unnecessarily. He moves. This movement creates momentum, and momentum, once established, carries him forward. The resistance that once felt strong begins to weaken. The hesitation that once delayed him begins to diminish. Action becomes less difficult, not because circumstances have changed, but because he has changed. He has closed the division. He has aligned his knowledge with his behavior. He has transformed intention into execution. And in doing so, he has taken control of the very force that once held him in place. Thus, let the individual understand that knowledge is not enough. That awareness, though valuable, must be followed by action. That the distance between knowing and doing is the true measure of his progress. Let him act, not when he feels ready, but when he recognizes what must be done. Let him move, Even when certainty is incomplete, let him begin. Even when the path is not fully visible, for in beginning he advances, and in advancing he becomes. And let him affirm with firm resolve, I close the distance between what I know and what I do. I act without delay, and through action, I transform my understanding into results. There comes a stage in the development of every individual where understanding alone is no longer sufficient, where awareness has reached its limit, and where the only remaining requirement is action. It is here that the individual must confront a truth that is both simple and demanding, that progress is not determined by intention, but by the timing of execution. Most men delay, not because they are incapable, but because they have formed the habit of postponement. They believe that action may be taken at a later time with equal effect. They convince themselves that delay carries no consequence, that what is not done today may be done tomorrow without loss. Yet this belief is mistaken, for delay does not preserve intention, it weakens it. Each moment in which a decision is not acted upon reduces its force. The clarity that once accompanied it begins to fade. The urgency diminishes. The mind, having postponed once, becomes more inclined to postpone again. And in this repetition, the original intention loses its power. This is why immediate action is essential, not because it guarantees success, but because it preserves momentum. When a man acts at the moment of decision, he strengthens his will. He reinforces the connection between thought and behavior. He establishes a pattern in which intention leads directly to execution without interruption. This pattern, once formed, becomes discipline. Discipline is not created through thought alone. It is not formed by desire nor by resolution. It is built through repeated action taken at the moment when action is required. Each time the individual acts without delay, he strengthens this discipline. Each time he postpones, he weakens it. Thus, discipline is not an abstract quality, it is the result of consistent choice. It is important to understand that action does not depend upon feeling. Many wait for motivation. They believe that they must feel prepared, inspired, or certain before they begin. They expect a condition of readiness that removes discomfort, and when this condition does not appear, they delay. Yet motivation is unreliable. It fluctuates. It rises and falls. It cannot be depended upon as a guide. The man who acts only when he feels inclined will act inconsistently. The man who acts because it is required will act regardless of condition. This is the difference between dependence and control. The individual who has developed the discipline of immediate action does not ask himself whether he feels ready. He recognizes what must be done, and he does it. He does not consult his comfort. He does not negotiate with resistance. He proceeds. This does not eliminate difficulty. It transforms it. For difficulty, when met with action, becomes manageable. When avoided, it becomes magnified. The task that appears large when delayed becomes smaller when begun. The resistance that seems strong when considered weakens when confronted. Thus, action reduces the very discomfort it appears to require. It must also be recognized that the first step is often the most significant, not because it accomplishes the entire task, but because it breaks inertia. Inertia is the condition of remaining still. It is sustained not by inability, but by lack of initiation. The moment the individual begins, inertia is broken. Movement replaces stillness. Progress replaces delay. And with this movement comes momentum. Momentum is one of the most valuable forces a man may possess. It carries him forward. It reduces the effort required to continue. It transforms action from a burden into a process. Yet momentum cannot be established without initiation, and initiation requires immediate action. The individual who hesitates at the point of decision interrupts this process. He allows the moment to pass. He returns to thought. He re-enters the cycle of consideration where action is discussed but not taken. The individual who acts avoids this interruption. He moves directly from decision to execution. He eliminates the space in which doubt may grow. He reduces the opportunity for excuse. He proceeds before resistance can strengthen. This is the essence of immediacy. It is not recklessness. It is not thoughtless action. It is the deliberate choice to act when action is recognized as necessary. This choice must be repeated. For discipline is not formed in a single moment. It is established through consistency. Each instance of immediate action contributes to the formation of a new pattern, a pattern in which delay is no longer accepted, in which hesitation is no longer entertained, in which action becomes the natural response to decision. As this pattern strengthens, the individual begins to change. He no longer sees himself as one who struggles to begin. He becomes one who moves without prolonged hesitation. This change in identity is significant, for identity governs behavior. The man who sees himself as disciplined will act accordingly. The man who sees himself as hesitant will reinforce that condition. Thus, each act of immediacy contributes not only to progress, but to identity. Others will begin to observe this change. They will notice that the individual does not delay unnecessarily, that when a decision is made, action follows, that he can be relied upon to move, not merely to consider. This reliability increases trust, for trust is built upon consistency. The individual who acts promptly demonstrates control. He shows that he is not governed by fluctuating feeling, but by deliberate choice. And this demonstration places him in a position of increased value. It must also be understood that immediate action does not require perfect conditions. Waiting for perfection is another form of delay. Conditions are rarely ideal. Circumstances are rarely complete. The individual who insists upon perfect readiness will remain inactive. The individual who acts within imperfect conditions adapts. He learns. He improves. And through this process, he creates the very conditions he once believed were required. This is the power of action. It shapes circumstance. It produces clarity. It generates progress. Thus, the individual must train himself to act at the moment of recognition. When he sees what must be done, he must begin. Not later, not after further consideration, but now. This does not require dramatic effort. It requires only the willingness to take the first step. And from that step, the next will follow. And from that, momentum will grow. And from that, change will occur. This is how the cycle of delay is broken. Not through thought, not through intention, but through immediate, repeated action. And so, let the individual establish this principle firmly within himself. Let him act when he knows. Let him move when he decides. Let him refuse the habit of postponement. For in this refusal lies his advancement. And let him affirm with unwavering resolve, I act at the moment of decision. I do not delay what I know must be done. Through immediate action, I strengthen my will and direct my life. There is a misunderstanding among many men that a single act of effort is sufficient to produce lasting change. They believe that one decisive moment, one strong beginning, or one display of discipline will alter the course of their lives. Yet, experience proves otherwise. For while a single action may initiate movement, it is repetition that determines direction. The patterns that hold a man in place are not formed in a day. They are built through repetition. Each delay, each excuse, each moment of inaction contributes to the formation of a habit. And over time, this habit becomes so familiar that it operates without conscious thought. The individual no longer decides to delay, he delays automatically. Thus, the breaking of such a pattern requires more than a single act. It requires a series of acts, repeated, consistent, uninterrupted. The first action, though important, is only the beginning. It demonstrates possibility. It proves that movement can occur, but it does not yet establish change. For change is not secured until the action is repeated often enough to replace the former. Habit. This is the law of substitution. A pattern is not removed, it is replaced. The individual who attempts to eliminate delay without establishing action will find himself returning to the same condition. For the mind, accustomed to repetition, seeks continuity. It replaces one pattern only when another has been sufficiently reinforced. Therefore, action must be repeated. Not occasionally, not when convenient, but regularly, until it becomes natural, until it requires less effort, until it begins to occur without the same resistance that once opposed to it. This repetition is not without challenge, for the individual will encounter moments in which the former pattern attempts to reassert itself. The familiar thoughts will return. The inclination to delay will arise. The excuses, though weakened, will still present themselves. It is in these moments that the true work is done, not in the absence of resistance, but in acting despite it. Each time the individual chooses action over delay, he weakens the old pattern. Each time he repeats this choice, he strengthens the new one. And though the progress may not be immediately visible, it is occurring quietly, steadily, certainly. Over time, the balance begins to shift. The resistance that once felt strong becomes less compelling. The excuses that once appeared convincing lose their influence. The individual begins to act with less hesitation, not because the conditions have changed, but because his response to them has changed. This is the emergence of a new pattern, one in which action follows recognition, one in which decision leads directly to execution, one in which delay is no longer the default. Response. It is also important to understand that the repetition required is not extreme. It does not demand that the individual accomplish everything at once. It requires only that he continue that he return to action each day, that he refuse to allow a single lapse to become a return to the former pattern. For it is not the occasional failure that determines outcome, but the consistent direction. A man may falter, yet continue. He may hesitate, yet proceed. He may encounter difficulty, yet persist. And in doing so, he maintains the pattern of action. This persistence produces accumulation. Each action, though small in itself, contributes to a larger result. Progress at first slight becomes more visible. Movement at first slow becomes more steady. The individual begins to see evidence of change, not as a sudden transformation, but as a gradual shift. This evidence strengthens his resolve, for what was once uncertain becomes confirmed. He sees that action produces result, that repetition produces progress, that persistence produces change. This realization increases his commitment. He no longer questions whether the process is effective. He has experienced it, and in experiencing it, he continues with greater confidence. Others will begin to observe this change as well. They will notice that the individual no longer remains in the same condition, that he moves, even when movement is not easy. That, he continues, even when progress is not immediate, they will see consistency. And in consistency, they will see strength. This perception alters how they regard him. Where once he may have been seen as uncertain, he is now seen as dependable. Where once he hesitated, he now proceeds. Where once he delayed, he now delivers. This shift increases his influence, for men are drawn to those who demonstrate reliability. They trust those who act. They respect those who persist, and they follow those who continue. It is through repetition that this trust is earned, not through isolated effort, but through sustained action. The individual who maintains this repetition begins to experience a change within himself. He no longer feels the same internal conflict. The tension between knowing and doing begins to dissolve. Action becomes more natural. Decision becomes more direct. Movement becomes more consistent. This is the formation of a new identity. He is no longer one who struggles against delay. He becomes one who acts. This identity, once established, carries its own momentum, for a man acts in accordance with how he sees himself. And when he sees himself as one who executes, he continues to execute. Thus, repetition does more than produce result. It produces transformation. It alters not only what a man does, but who he becomes. And this transformation is enduring, for it is built upon habit, and habit, once formed, continues. Therefore, let the individual understand that change is not secured in a moment, but in a series of moments. Let him return again and again to action. Let him persist, even when progress appears small. Let him continue, even when resistance remains. For it is through this repetition that the pattern is broken, and once broken, replaced, and once replaced, sustained. And let him affirm, with steady conviction, through repeated action, I replace delay with progress. I return to action each day, and through this consistency, I establish a new direction for my life. When a man has acted not once, but repeatedly, when he has chosen movement over delay, execution over explanation, and persistence over retreat, there begins to form within him a quality that cannot be borrowed, imitated, or granted by another. It is the quiet emergence of self-trust. Self-trust is not declared, it is built. It does not arise from belief alone, nor from words spoken with conviction. It is formed through evidence created by one's own actions. Each time a man follows through on what he has decided, he gives himself proof. Each time he acts despite resistance, he strengthens the foundation upon which trust is built. At first, this trust is slight. The individual may still question himself. He may still feel the remnants of doubt. Yet something has begun to change. He no longer relies entirely upon intention. He has begun to see that he is capable of action, even when action is difficult. This realization is significant, for doubt thrives in the absence of proof. When a man repeatedly delays, he confirms his uncertainty. He reinforces the belief that he cannot be relied upon, even by himself. But when he acts, he introduces a new form of evidence that contradicts the former belief. And as this evidence accumulates, doubt begins to weaken, not all at once, but gradually. Each completed action reduces its influence. Each fulfilled decision strengthens confidence, until, over time, the individual begins to trust himself not because he hopes to, but because he has seen that he can. This trust produces a change in behavior. The individual no longer hesitates as he once did. He no longer questions every decision, nor does he require extended reassurance before acting. He moves with greater certainty, not because he possesses all answers, but because he trusts his ability to respond. This is the beginning of authority, not authority granted by position, but authority developed within. The man who trusts himself does not depend upon external approval to guide his actions. He considers the input of others, but he is not governed by it. He listens, but he decides. He reflects, but he acts. This independence marks a turning point, for the individual is no longer controlled by uncertainty. He becomes self-directed, and in this self-direction, he gains the ability to shape his path with greater precision. It must be understood that this authority is not loud. It does not seek attention. It is expressed through consistency, through the steady alignment of decision and action, through the absence of unnecessary delay, through the presence of deliberate movement. Others begin to notice this. They observe that the individual no longer wavers as he once did, that his actions follow his words, that his direction is not easily altered by external influence. And in this observation, they begin to assign him a new standing. They see him as reliable, as steady, as capable. This perception creates trust, and trust creates influence. For men place confidence in those who demonstrate control over themselves. They are drawn to those who act with certainty, who move with purpose, and who do not retreat at the first sign of difficulty. Thus, the individual who has developed self-trust begins to influence those around him, not through force, but through example. His actions speak. His consistency communicates. His presence suggests strength. And this influence extends beyond immediate interaction. It shapes opportunity. For when others recognize that a man can be relied upon, They extend to him greater responsibility. They involve him in matters of importance. They seek his judgment. They trust his execution. This trust increases his value, not because he claims it, but because he demonstrates it. It is also in this stage that the individual experiences a reduction in internal conflict, where once there was tension between what he intended and what he did, there is now alignment. His decisions are followed by action. His plans are supported by execution. The division that once created frustration begins to dissolve. This alignment produces clarity. He no longer debates endlessly within himself. He decides, and then he acts. This simplicity is powerful, for it removes unnecessary delay. It directs energy toward movement rather than consideration. It allows progress to continue without interruption. As this condition strengthens, the individual begins to operate with greater efficiency. He spends less time thinking about whether he should act and more time acting. He reduces the space in which doubt may grow. He minimizes the influence of hesitation. He moves forward with purpose. This movement becomes natural, not forced, not strained, but consistent. It is guided by habit, by the repeated pattern of action that has been established, and through this pattern, the individual solidifies his identity. He is no longer one who struggles against himself. He is one who directs himself. This identity is stable, for it is supported by experience. It is reinforced by repetition. It is confirmed by result. Others will continue to recognize this. They will observe that he can be counted upon, that he does not require constant supervision, that he fulfills what he begins. This recognition places him in a position of increasing trust, and with trust comes opportunity. Thus, the individual who once felt controlled by delay becomes one who controls his own direction. He moves with intention. He acts with consistency. He decides with confidence. And in doing so, he establishes a form of authority that cannot be easily taken from him. It is not dependent upon circumstance. It is not granted by another. It is built within. And as long as he continues to act in accordance with it, it remains. Therefore, let the individual continue to strengthen this self-trust. Let him act upon his decisions. Let him follow through consistently. Let him build, through repeated execution, a foundation that cannot be shaken by doubt. For in this foundation lies his authority, and in his authority lies his advancement. And let him affirm with calm certainty, I trust myself because I act. My actions confirm my direction, and through this consistency I establish authority over my